So on behalf of the Center, UNC-TV, and the Carolina Entrepreneurship Initiative, it's my privilege to welcome you here tonight as part of this event that's part of Carolina's Entrepreneurship Week. So we're fortunate to have Dennis Whittle with us tonight. He's the Chairman and CEO of Global Giving, and he will provide some opening remarks and then moderate a panel discussion about social entrepreneurship. So as some of you may know, Dennis is a graduate of UNC. He's also one of the founding members of UNC's Advisory Board for International Studies. This board has been really instrumental in increasing participation in and funding for study abroad. He also was pivotal in getting the Associate Provost position for International Affairs and establishing the Global Education Center here. So it's an honor to have Dennis Whittle here with us tonight, and like you, I really look forward to hearing his insights into how social entrepreneurs are putting their business savvy to use to make the world a better place. So, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks to Kathy at WUNC and to Ray Farrow from the Institute, and to everyone from all the initiatives and the centers and the business school and everything. It's really a pleasure to be back at UNC, and especially to be back here at the business school. I was reminiscing with Professor Johnson just before we started that the last time I was here, I think, was 1999. And he and one other faculty member were these lone voices in the wilderness talking about entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. And I remember going away then wondering whether this is really going to take root or whether these guys are going to be smothered by the orthodoxy of the normal business curriculum. And nothing gave me greater pleasure than to be invited here and to see all the amazing initiatives that are going on. Net Impact. Someone told me today that Net Impact, 40% of the students are members of Net Impact, and on and on. So it's really a great pleasure. So thank you for having me. We hold these truths to be self-evident: that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. These words that were written 230 years ago by a small group of men set the world on a different course. Some revolutionary changes happened overnight, and others took much longer than any of us could have imagined. Last month's election of Barack Obama helped this country make good on its original promise, and I think it's a time for celebration. Washington, a couple of Tuesday nights ago, was an enormous party. And in January, they're predicting that 4 million people will descend on the mall for what I think will justly be seen as one of the greatest celebrations in our country's history. Incidentally, if anyone's looking for a place to stay, I have a bed that I'm willing to lease out at $5,000 a night for that night. So why is that relevant? Why did I start with that? And, well, the men who signed that document were this country's original social entrepreneurs. They saw a world of great injustices, and they got together, and they just simply declared that the world would be different. They declared that men had certain inalienable rights, and they declared that governments derived their power from the people and worked for the people. These ideas were all very radical at the time. But the signers of that declaration, the men who declared that, then had to make that declaration into a reality. And they faced, as you know, many obstacles. First, many people thought they were naive, and especially the elites of many other countries. And if you read back through the diaries of some of the signers of the Declaration, they were very conscious of the fact that many of their peers in Europe thought they were incredibly naive, that others did not believe that people could, in fact, govern themselves. Second, the signers faced disbelief from the people themselves in the United States, and what would become the United States. Many colonial Americans believed that the Declaration was nothing more than a pipe dream, and that it couldn't possibly be true. And third, the dominant institution in charge, the British government, wasn't about to let the colonies go without a fight. So over the next several years, the leaders of the American Revolution battled all these obstacles, and many times they were in despair. George Washington himself thought the war was lost more than once, and yet they persevered. And they persevered driven by the idea that all men should be equal, and that governments should serve the people, and not vice versa. And after persevering, eventually they won. They overthrew the old system, and they instituted a new system. And that is what social entrepreneurship is all about. And fortunately, we're here today because a number of factors have conspired to bring social entrepreneurship into sudden blossom around the world. And we're here to celebrate that as well. Bill Drayton of Ashoka, who many of you have probably heard of, invented the term social entrepreneurship back in the 1980s, and people thought he was crazy. But since then, the number of change makers in the world who have been identified by Bill Drayton and Ashoka and others has grown exponentially. And the growth has been fueled by and facilitated by many things, including a rising consciousness that the world is flat and the world is integrated. By the fact that many people, millions of Americans, have traveled around the world and seen conditions in other places. By the fact that there are 250,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers in the United States. By the fact that companies increasingly realize that it's in their interests that the conditions in which they operate and the communities from which they draw their labor pool be prosperous and free. And these new social entrepreneurs have risen also because of the support of new organizations such as Echoing Green, the Klaus Schwab Foundation, and the Jeffrey Skoll Foundation. The Skoll Foundation is one of the supporters of the TV program that we were looking at today at WUNC. So what brings this movement of social entrepreneurship to a tipping point is the Internet. The Internet allows the emergence of a vibrant ecosystem of social entrepreneurship to evolve. Social entrepreneurs can now learn from each other much faster. They can disseminate their ideas much faster. They can mobilize support from all around the world, and in the end, they can bring about change much faster. And when people succeed at doing this rapidly, other people are inspired by this. Now, I spent 15 years of my career in the old system. I spent 15 years of my career in the equivalent of the old British colonial government at the World Bank. And like the old British colonial government, the World Bank is not all bad. In fact, it's got a lot of very good elements, a lot of very good people, a lot of very good dedicated people. And like the old British colonial government, which had the Magna Carta, the World Bank is pointing in the right direction. But it is nothing like it could be. The World Bank alone has 10,000 staff who, by their own admission, use probably 25% of their own capacity in doing good in the world. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. The social entrepreneurs that we're here today to celebrate and talk about, many of whom are going to be on the panel, represent not only tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of more people that will lead this movement. So our mission at Global Giving is to allow any social entrepreneur in the world to post their world-changing project on the web, and anyone in the world to support it and to find out where their money goes. It's that simple. I'm going to show you a little bit here how it works. Oh, I'll be able to see from here. Okay. And so global giving is a little bit like eBay for social entrepreneurs. But instead of selling baseball cards or dishes or whatever, you're selling your projects. So if you look along this side, when social entrepreneurs list their projects, they're put into a certain topic area, and donors can come onto the site and choose by topic area or by region, or they can choose to see which projects are the most popular, depending on what they're interested in. So let's just say, for example, you're interested in family planning in Guatemala. You'd click on that, and this project from a social entrepreneurial group would come up there. You can see a summary of the project. If you go down, you can see more details about the project, where it is in the world, and read updates from the field on what's happening with the project. If you're a donor, for once, you can see exactly where your money goes. I'm not sure why I pulled this one up here and I'm pointing to this particular one. I would not recommend that. But you're able to, depending on how much money you have, you're able to see exactly, concretely, how far it can go. One of the things that I was on NPR a couple of months ago, and Michelle Martin said to me on the air, she said, "You know, Dennis, this makes me feel like I can be an ordinary Oprah. This is a site for ordinary Oprahs. You don't have to be worth $100 million to make an impact around the world." We then allow you, as you can see, I like this project, so I did not donate that $15. I donated $70, I think. But you can see that 220 people have donated to this project, and they've donated $12,900 so far. What we're creating here is two things. We're creating a community of social entrepreneurs who can get their ideas up and be heard, and we're creating a community of donors who come together to support this project. And the goal is, over time, to enable these communities to form and flourish and do more and more and more projects, to learn from each other, and to enable the social entrepreneurship movement, which is in its nascent stages, to actually have a form of finance going forward to grow. So perhaps later we can go into this in greater detail. But let me just finish up here briefly by saying that 230 years ago, the signers of the Declaration of Independence declared a new world for Americans. And I think now we're in the middle of a collective declaration by a new set of social entrepreneurs that all people everywhere in the world are created equal, and they all have the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So since we have an amazing group of panelists here, I am not going to go on forever about the theory of social entrepreneurship, because I find in my own talks that examples illustrate the concept way better than a windy old academic discussion of it. And along the way, I'll try to illustrate some elements from global giving, but we'll also benefit from insights from 5 amazing people that are here today. So thank you very much, and we will.
Okay. Yes, sounds like I'm hooked up. Hi, I'm Kathy Dobbins, and I am the Director of Federal and Foundation Grants at UNCTV. Now, if you're paying attention, you may be asking yourself, why is UNCTV here? Especially since you don't see any cameras rolling, and I can assure you, you're not on candid camera. Well, the reason why UNCTV is here is because this project actually began when PBS Frontline contacted public television stations and said, would you be interested, we have a few grants, would you be interested in highlighting some of the social entrepreneurs in your community? And I immediately, of course, said yes, and my next step was to pick up the phone and call the Center for Sustainable Enterprise and said, would you be interested in partnering with us? Would you help us identify social entrepreneurs that would be worthwhile to profile? And would you help us host a panel discussion? And here we are today. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be here. In just the few moments that I have, I wanted to acquaint you with some of the resources that both PBS and UNCTV have that can offer you that will help you increase your knowledge and perhaps your connectedness with other social entrepreneurs. So first of all, what I want to say is that PBS Frontline produced a series of 18 stories on social entrepreneurs that are located throughout the world. And these stories are available on DVDs. And so I'm here to present a set of DVDs from Frontline to the Center for Sustainable Enterprise. And these will be available in the library for you to check out. And while I'm thanking the Center for Sustainable Enterprise, I want to thank Jessica, who worked very hard on this event today. So could we give her a round of applause? What I wanted to do is to make you aware of some, just like I said, some of the resources that are available. And Frontline has not only put their stories on a DVD that you can check out at the library, but they're also online right here. Now, I don't expect that you'll remember all this address, but if you Google Frontline Social Entrepreneurs, this is the first site that will come up. And what they have done is they are video streaming all of these stories. And I have seen most of them, and they're quite inspiring and good. So I would commend them for your viewing. One of the things that I particularly wanted to point out that may not be so obvious is if you go here on this tab called Educators, and then you go to Social Entrepreneurs, then you will get a list of resources. Now, the beginning of this page is a lot of classroom activities and activities for middle and high schoolers, and I know that most of us are beyond that, so stick with me. If you page down, then you'll see here related links, and it says Profiles and Principles. There's a story in here by Rick Dees. There is Online Communities for Social Entrepreneurs and organizations that support social entrepreneurs, and even a student competition. So I wanted to particularly make you aware of those resources. And I wanted to say that UNCTV, like Frontline, has produced a series of 3 features on social entrepreneurs here in North Carolina. And you can find those by going to our website, which is simple, www.unctv.org. And if you scroll down on the front page, you will see Social Entrepreneurs in North Carolina. And here, we, like Frontline, are trying to video stream the 3 features that we've done. Now, if you look here, you only see one, Africa Rising, but the other 2 will probably be up within a week. So continue to check back at this site for the 3 stories that we have been doing. And then if you click on this link in particular, I want to call your attention to this. It's called UNCTV Interactive. This will give you a chance to read profiles and watch videos, to sign up for podcasts, to read other inspiring stories, and to connect with other social entrepreneurs that are here in North Carolina and across the world. So I just wanted to acquaint you with these resources. I hope you will take advantage of them in your quest to learn more and to interact with others that are like-minded. And this concludes my time, and now I'll turn it back over to Dennis for our wonderful panel discussion. Thank you.
Maybe I can ask our panelists to join us up here. So everyone should have a program out there that lists the panelists. But I thought we might take a couple of minutes just to introduce folks. I actually was planning to speak longer, but then when I got here today and found out who was going to be on the panel, I was really eager to hear a lot more from them than from me. Because seriously, what we do at Global Giving is to facilitate folks who are really doing good. We're only kind of the market maker. We're not the people actually out there doing the good. So I'm really happy to have this team here. I'm going to sort of provoke the discussion by a few questions, but I find that stories illuminate things better than theory. So I'll start off by just saying that my own journey to doing what I did was a very crooked one. And I was a very unmotivated undergraduate here. I majored in religious studies because it was an easy thing to get a degree in, and there was a couple good professors. And I'd sort of drank beer and didn't think much about it. And I literally followed my girlfriend to graduate school. And then I needed a job, and I got a nice, secure job at a prestigious place that paid well. And for many years, I was a risk-averse bureaucrat, rising through a system that I played very well and didn't try to topple. And then something happened in my professional career that set me off on this crazy path of working with social entrepreneurs. So I thought I might just ask the panelists just quickly to go through their own path toward what they're doing. And in some cases, people were born with this in their blood, and in other cases, like me, maybe they came to it later in life. So I can think of no one better to start with than Professor Jim Johnson.
Thank you, Chris. I think my path to social entrepreneurship sort of grew out of my academic experience, first at UCLA, where I spent much of my career there studying the causes and consequences of poverty, and I had the good faith of being recruited back to Chapel Hill to actually no longer just study poverty, but figure out how to solve and eradicate poverty in America and the world more generally. And if I might say so, I think one of the premier social entrepreneurs, the building across the street and the institute that I have the good fortune of working in, the Frank Hawkins Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise, I think Frank Hawkins Kenan was a consummate social entrepreneur because he thought the private sector was unappreciated in terms of its role in solving pressing societal problems. Not only did he think that, but he committed his resources to establish an institute whose sole mission is to think no small thoughts about how you solve pressing societal problems. And I think my journey is having the good fortune of working in an institute where we really believe we can change the world, and we have the leadership in Jack Casarda, who's here tonight, that gives us free rein to think outside the box about how you solve pressing societal problems, both domestically and internationally. And I think it's just the stars really aligned for me. And then there were some other developments that occurred domestically and internationally that I think were driving forces. But my journey is a function of sheer good luck of having the opportunity to come back home and be near family and do things that I really care about.
Yeah, I think luck is really a recurrent factor, for me at least, and that really resonates, Jim. Thank you. Next to Joel Thomas from Nourish International. I was looking at Joel's bio here, and he's kind of the opposite of me. I was an aimless student, kind of drinking beer through college. Thomas was a starting block fellow, an Eagle Scout, and a member of the Order of the Golden Fleece. Very directed from an early age. So can you talk a little bit about that, Joel?
That sounds nice. It's actually not true. So it might happen a little earlier. So, I mean, I knew when I was young. I guess the question was how we kind of got here and what really took place to, put us in positions as social entrepreneurs. I think for me in high school, would always be doing homework and always get sidetracked, and I would just start writing. And I wanted to do something big. Favorite video games were always Final Fantasy. Okay, big nerd, but But it was always these games where you're taking on these really big, intractable problems. But I had no idea what to do with that, so I got sidetracked for like 10 years. And in college was encouraged to follow a career with science, chemistry, and biology, and just absolutely was, bored out of my mind. But it really wasn't until actually junior year, and luck had a really big part to play in it. I just had the very good fortune of living on the same hallway of some really incredible students who got it, who were globally engaged, and helped me fill the knowledge gap of what was really going on in the world of global poverty. I had no idea that it existed. So that was the big step for me, just having friends who hammered me for a year to try and get involved with this organization called Hunger Lunch before I finally did. And then luck plays a role again. The university was developing this ecosystem around entrepreneurship and encouraging people to take on these ideas. So 8 of us decided to enter the Carolina Challenge with their idea and figure out how big can we scale this. During that year, I had I think one thing you mentioned beforehand, or any specific moments where you sort of had the aha moment that changed you. For me, it was during the fall of junior year. I was really involved with Nourish and working on global poverty, but I wasn't completely convinced that this is the issue that I should be spending my time on. I thought there was a lot of merit in individualism. And I had to fully grapple with that, but finally came to the conclusion one day, sitting in my room junior year, that a child with infant diarrhea has no chance. A child who contracts malaria or AIDS before they're even born has no chance. And that's just not fair. And it was at that moment that I said, I'm going to dedicate myself completely to this organization. Then, fortunately, the university developing an ecosystem to support people like me who wanted to run with these crazy ideas. Big moment was here, actually in this room. We got second place in the Carolina Challenge, and that was other people saying, you can actually do this, go for it. And then, last but not least, having people who could temper the enthusiasm with guided advice. Jim, Ryan, and specifically there was a memo from our friend Naman who sent me an email saying, Joel, our greatest impact actually in the world is not going to be our specific projects overseas each summer. It's actually going to be the impact that we have on our fellow students, because there's only so much you can do each summer, but if you change their lives over the next 50 years of their lifetime, that's where they're going to be able to develop.
That's good.
So that was huge. I'll stop, sorry.
No, but I want to come back. Actually, I think that's a really important thing I want to come back to later, the way that you perceive impact. And you did say one thing I think is really important, and that's the concept of an ecosystem of support. 230 years ago, there were a bunch of guys sitting in a room who made up this Declaration of Independence, and they didn't really have an ecosystem of support. And it was amazing what they did. And I think one of the challenges of social entrepreneurship today is how to create an ecosystem so people like Joel can be encouraged to do these things and to have the support they need to succeed. And Jim said he was standing on the shoulder of giants doing what he did, and he in turn is one of the giants on whose shoulders people like Joel and the rest of us are standing. So the concept of an ecosystem I hope we'll come back to as well. Next up is someone who I hoped never to meet in person. Ryan Alice, who I've known by email or in his blog for several years. And he's even worse than Joel. At age 18, he published a book called $0 to $1 Million, explaining a 10-step process for obtaining $1 million in sales and recommendations on subjects of management and conducting business internationally. That was at age 18. So Ryan, where did you come from?
I'm proud to be here on this panel back at UNC, where I went to college, and I'm also proud to be here with Joel. And I've worked with Joel for the past 3 years, and board chair of Nourish International, which is a tremendous social entrepreneurial organization. I got started from the other side. I came from the business route. My uncle gave me a computer when I was 11, living on the west coast of Florida. Started out doing computer help, teaching senior citizens how to use the internet for $5 an hour back in 1995. Made $460 that first summer, and went from there. Got into website design, website marketing. When I came up here to Carolina in 2002, co-founded a company called iContact. And we bootstrapped that company, couldn't really raise venture capital at that point, not having much experience, and it being a difficult economic time then. So we bootstrapped, lived in the office, had an office above Cadova here on Franklin and Columbia Street intersection, and we figured out how to generate sales, how to generate revenue, create a product. Today we've got a 135-person company. We've moved out to Durham, to RTP, and a company that will do a little bit north of $15 million in sales this year. So I started out on the business side. The key differentiator in my life was something that happened to me when I was 17. I was taking a microeconomics class in high school, my senior year, and my professor, Robert Fletcher, taught me economics, or taught the class economics, not from a mathematical perspective as it's often taught, but from a sociological perspective, from a human perspective. And he talked about certain facts that I could not ignore once I had heard them. Things like, at that time, 2.7 billion people lived on under $2 a day, purchase power parity adjusted. Today it's 2.6 billion, not that much better. Things like 49,000 people just like you and I, pass away, die needlessly every single day from preventable diseases and starvation. That's just something that does not need to exist in the wealthy world that we have. So once I heard those and realized, these are from the World Bank, from the World Health Organization, these are real facts, this is really happening, it made me not just want to be an entrepreneur and be about making money, but be a social entrepreneur and be about giving back and creating change. So I think I'm coming at this from two angles. One is to create a socially responsible for-profit business. At iContact, we have programs where we give 1% of our annual payroll. This year it'll be about $60,000, and it goes up every year, to 15 different organizations in our community, internationally and locally, in which we can contribute and make a difference and make a positive impact. On the nonprofit side, I started an organization called the Humanity Campaign. It's a grant-making nonprofit organization which contributes funds to organizations like Nourish International and a number of others in developing countries and here in North Carolina to work toward eradicating hunger and poverty in our lifetime. Very, very similar mission to that of Nourish International. So that's what I'm really passionate about, and I think you can make a tremendous amount of global change through business, and I think you can apply business principles to the nonprofit world to make an equally large amount of change. So my definition of an entrepreneur is someone that rearranges resources to improve the world. And I think that is equally true for a social entrepreneur and an entrepreneur. Either way, there's no way to make money if you're not helping others. There's no way to make a positive impact in the globe if you're not doing it in an efficient way that's sustainable.
That's great, Ryan. One thing you said that really resonated, I think, for me and most people here is the idea of bootstrapping. Ryan's first company, there was nobody that was going to give him money to get going, so he just had to scramble and make it work. The social entrepreneurship field is in this space right now. There's very few sources of money at the early stages to get going. And so you're seeing the successful entrepreneurs are superhuman people who are able to persevere through that and make it. And one of the challenges in the field is to create a lot more money coming in for early stage startups of social entrepreneurship. The other thing, Ryan, you mentioned that resonated was you're kind of hearing from this teacher about the world and people are dying from dirty water and whatever, and this kind of sense of, hey, the world shouldn't be, that's not right. Today I was in a taxi coming here from the airport, and the taxi driver was from rural North Carolina, and I would say his politics were pretty far right. And he asked me what I did, because he dropped me off at WNC, and I told him what the interview was about. And he said, I heard 3 years ago, I heard on the radio that, 200,000 kids die every month from just dirty water. And he said, that just sucks. And he said, so I started, giving to this project at church, and he's gotten involved in this big clean water project in Africa. And he's not coming at it from a social angle or a liberal angle or anything. He just thinks, in his words, it just sucks. That just sucks. That's not right. And I think that kind of sense of outrage is or moral indignation motivates a lot of people. Next up is Jim Thomas from Africa Rising. And when I was at WNC today, they were showing me a clip of Africa Rising. And I was stunned by this because their philosophy, and especially the way Jim talks about it, is far more eloquent than what we do at Global Giving. And Jim talks, well, I'll let Jim speak for himself, and because he can do it better than me. Jim, how did you get here? How did you end up doing this?
Nice setup. How did I get here? You described yourself as somebody who is risk averse or was risk averse, and I would say that I tend more in the other direction. I'm more of a risk seeker. And so when I graduated from college, I went as fast as I could to Africa, lived for a couple of years there, working in the Congo, and working with severely malnourished children and rehabilitating them back into health. Eventually went back to the States and back to graduate school and did my PhD in Kenya, and they're working again in rural populations in the central of Kenya. And through a series of events that I'm not going to bother you with, I ended up being a professor here at UNC. I'm in the School of Public Health right now, and over time I have been frustrated by academics. Academic life tends to pull its punches and not really get into the places that really matter. They would rather study them. And although I do study them, and I do publish, and I do get grants and all that stuff that we're supposed to do, I wanted to have a stronger connection, a full connection with what I was writing about and talking about. And so I began looking for a way to be involved in the place that I knew best, which was Africa, and to take my knowledge, which at the time and continues to be AIDS, and to find a way to go and to be there while still living here. And through the church that I attend, I began taking groups of people with me to Kenya. We established a relationship with a church there, a Kenyan church, and our intent was to go be there with them and to be listeners and learners from them, to not go as fixers. And that was such a rewarding experience, to learn and to listen and to walk through the difficult places with them and to see how they were responding to the problems and to see the people who were working there rise up with creative and resourceful answers. And we eventually developed a relationship with an AIDS program in one of the slums of Nairobi, and came to the point where we said, you know, we're enjoying this relationship with this AIDS program. We're learning a lot. We're feeling really great about what they are doing. This could really be multiplied 10, 20, 40, 100 times over. And that's where the idea of Africa Rising was born, to help people connect with the programs that are working, and to be involved with Africans not because they know less, not because they need more, but because they know more, and because they are more resourceful, and because we have so much to learn from them. So one of the things that we emphasize in Africa Rising is not just connecting with these organizations financially, giving them the money that often they do need, but connecting with them in a more relational way. So one of the important parts of Africa Rising is helping individuals and organizations to establish relationships with the people that they're connecting with in Africa.
That's great. And I think, that really speaks to me, Jim, because the old system that the system of social entrepreneurship is replacing is the antithesis of what Jim does. And it's what I did for 15 years. And it's a system where the philosophy is you have these institutions, and you hire the smartest people you can find. You put them all in one place together. They go out to countries in Asia and Africa and all around the world and determine what the country's problems are. And then they determine what the solutions to those problems are. And then they implement the solutions to those problems. And then they evaluate how well they did. Now you can imagine what the regular economy would be like if we operated like this. You can imagine how instead of having Ryan going out there and figuring out what his clients really needed, if there were just kind of a central planning bureau that determined what his clients really needed and gave it to him, it wouldn't work very well. And what Jim's talking about is a much more bottom-up, radically different system where you invert the paradigm and you ask people, what do you care about? What's the problems you're facing? And what are your ideas for solving them? And then you do what Joel said Jim did to him. You help them, you coach them, you provide, I don't remember what your term was, constructive feedback or corrective, whatever it was, to get to their solutions. So it's right at the heart, I think, of what we're talking about. Finally, we have Kari Leach, who's a co-founder of Water Plus. And we've spoken many times about water And water is a surprisingly important and very basic thing in people's lives. It's not always sexy. And many of the projects we did at the World Bank, I remember it wasn't prestigious to work on water at the World Bank because that's just kind of simple. It's much more prestigious to do these complex projects. And yet, if you could do one thing in the world to make it a better place, it would be to improve the quality of water. So, Kari, tell us how you got to be doing this and a little bit about what you do.
Hello. My background is civil engineering. I am from Colorado, where I have been faced with water quality and quantity problems since I could remember my parents and grandparents talking about it, given on a much different scale than a lot of other countries face. But it's been ingrained in me to try to understand these issues. And so I did my undergrad in civil engineering in Colorado, and then went through a process of working for an engineering firm in Colorado. I ended up working for the government of Costa Rica doing engineering projects, and was greatly involved in, and still am to a certain extent, an organization called Engineers Without Borders, which addresses water infrastructure problems and sanitation infrastructure issues in other countries. And so my entire life up until the past 1 or 2 years has very much been the system, which we were just talking about, where I'm an engineer. I know how to solve problems. I know what problems other countries face, right? I understand how water flows downhill. And so all these organizations and groups that I've been a part of have all very much embodied the, you have a problem, let me tell you what it is, and then let me allow myself to fix it for you, which is just a very imperialistic and unsustainable way to go about any problem that we think somebody else is having. But so I have recently, in the past few years, Joel mentioned a friend of his, Nauman, who is a rising giant, I think, in the field of social entrepreneurship and medicine. He introduced this concept of developing a device to treat drinking water and allowing for improvements based on, it's still slightly, we haven't quite shifted the paradigm yet, but still addressing how we think we can solve the water problem, but from a product and a business which people can buy into or not based on what they think their needs are. And so I'm now working on technical aspects of a water treatment device company, Water Plus.
Okay. Well, everybody here on this panel looks pretty impressive, and they look pretty put together, and I have a tie on today, and I heard someone say to Jim, I think, that they were surprised he showed up in a tie. And it's a little bit misleading about what social entrepreneurship is and what we actually do day to day. And I was reading a book on the way down here about social entrepreneurship, and it cited a study that said social entrepreneurship is a form of psychosis. And I laughed at that because I always think of it as being you're either bipolar when you start or you're bipolar when you end. And so most of the time, or many times during our lives, we're not so put together. We're a little more disheveled, and times can be kind of rough. And so I thought I might just ask the panelists just briefly to talk about some of their lowest lows, or maybe one of your lowest lows and then one of your highest highs. And how have you kept the balance between the lows and the highs as you've gone along? So, Kari, we're going to start from your end.
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with low, so we can move into the high. I very distinctly remember working in Haiti on a water system. The water system was not in bad shape. I was working on behalf of Engineers Without Borders. Wasn't in bad shape. People were still getting sick. Did some water quality tests. Definitely showed that it could have been a lot better. But even though the water quality wasn't bad, it was still a very undesirable situation. We were in the last forested valley of Haiti, which was great, but that was soon to be changing. There wasn't protection in place, any sort of mechanisms to protect the remaining forested valley of Haiti. People had no idea how to maintain their water system, it was obvious that without the Germans had built the system, Americans had been maintaining it. Now a group of students, volunteer students, was going down to try to continue to maintain it. It's just the picture of something that is not sustainable. And I remember sitting in this village, speaking with Asians about how grateful they were that we were there helping them with their water system. And while that could be a high, I felt, that was start of the beginning of the turning point for me when I realized that just was not where I wanted anybody to be. I did not want them to be in that situation. I did not want myself to be in that situation. And that's when I decided that our traditional engineering solutions and the way that a lot of groups in America go about solving these problems is just not, it can't be the way we go about it anymore. And then one of my highs, I feel so it's a slightly childish moment, but last year and Joel is actually a co-founder of Water Plus with me, but last year I guess it was this year, we placed highly in a global social entrepreneurship competition, and I remember we're coming up with all these ideas. We've been working so hard as a team for months trying to put these business plans together, and so it was still a very nascent stage of the business, and I remember placing highly in this organization, and we'd all worked so hard to get there, and we all understood why we were doing it, and not that as a social entrepreneur, I feel as though I need to have a lot of external validation, but it's still needed sometimes, and I remember feeling like I was really on the right track and doing well, and other people feeling like we were doing well, and sharing it with my team.
Yeah, no, external validation. There's some people, it's really interesting, there's some people that don't need external validation. They're the minority, I think. I think that for many of us, without that, we probably wouldn't have kept going. My own low point, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my low point. In 2002, August 2002, my CFO came in, Chief Financial Officer, and he said, we're $2.2 million in debt. And he said, I see no alternative to bankruptcy. And I would say that was pretty much the most depressing time of my life. And I was sitting there thinking, yeah, 2.2, okay. So I had to face the prospect of shutting Global Giving down or calling up my debtors. I wish I had read Ryan. I needed Ryan. I had to call up my debtors, to whom I owed $2 million, and tell them that they were now equity holders in Global Giving. And this series of calls was the toughest series of calls I've ever made in my life. And I often wonder why. To this day, I wonder why I kept going. Why the hell would you go through that? But we restructured, and we've grown rapidly since then. And I think, for me, it comes down to a lot to external validation. It comes down to, at that point in time, I ran across some people who said, Dennis, this is really funny. They say, I don't know anything about your $2.2 million in debt, but I just know you need to make this thing work. This is really, really, really important. Is it possible that the world could be like this? You've got to make this work. And I'm like, what about my $2.2 million in debt? They're like, I don't know anything about that, but just keep going, because this is a great thing. And so I can validate your external validation, the importance of that. It sounds childish and it sounds whatever, but it is really important to a lot of people. So, Jim?
Well, I haven't been $2.2 million in debt, and my stuff is pretty small potatoes compared to that. We're still at that bootstrapping stage. But we had a low point just a couple of months ago. We have an annual fundraiser that we hold out at the Coca Booth Amphitheater. It's called Hope Fest, and it's designed largely to bring in money for one of the organizations that we support in Kenya called Beacon of Hope, one of the AIDS ministries. They teach these women to weave rugs, and then we help sell these rugs. I should have brought some tonight. I didn't think of that. So we had all these bands lined up, and we had sold enough tickets in advance that we knew we were going to be in the black, but any benefit, any true surplus was going to come from the ticket sales at the door. Coca Booth doesn't really have a door. Coca Booth is outside, and so it's ticket sales at the gate. But that outside part is key because there was rain forecast, And so we were halfway through the afternoon, and there was this giant bolt of lightning right behind the stage. The kind of bolt that just makes you jump, and you think, oh my gosh, I just missed, a brush with death. And so the band stopped, they dropped their electric instruments, right? And they, they're peeling off their guitars, and everybody headed back to a place where there was shelter, and stood around there while it rained and rained and rained. It stopped, and people filtered back out onto the grass, and the musicians went back onto the stage, and we went a couple more bands, and we're watching these clouds, and they're coming over. And there were some folks that had iPhones, and they were watching the weather patterns on their iPhones. And they were noticing that there was this cloud formation right over us. And nothing around, everything else was moving around us, but there was this cloud right hovering over the Kokobuth Amphitheater. And it happened again. It rained again, just this torrential downpour. All the rugs that we had out, we had to bring back under cover. I think we sold 3. We sold 3 rugs that day. Normally we'll sell 30, 40. And the musicians had to, because it kept raining, they had to go back under the cover and back, or the food court, and stand on a table and play acoustic guitar to these people who had the nerve to stick around. And of course the gate sales, nothing. Who was going to come to a gate, in the middle of a rainstorm? So that was not a good time for us. We were all very soggy people, very grumpy when we were packing things away. But a high came when we have our sole employee at the moment. We're hoping to hire an executive director, but our sole employee at the moment is a Kenyan woman living in Nairobi. Her name is Mary. She's very creative, very business-minded, and she has helped us line up the organizations and to vet the organizations that we support. And one of those organizations is a church that she attends that when Kenya had its post-election violence just after the new year, that church is right next to a big polo field, and a lot of the people who were displaced from their homes camped out on that polo field. So it was a field of displaced people. That church began feeding them. They became one of the organizations that we support. There's another organization in Uganda where girls who had been captured by the Lord's Resistance Army, if you've seen Blood Diamond, different country, same idea of how they would capture people and make them into soldiers, or in the case of girls, into sex slaves. And a number of girls had escaped. Some had been released, and they'd come back to this town. 30 of them had been captured at one time. So they'd come back to this town, and this organization is formed called Concerned Parents Association that is helping them get back on their feet and learn a trade and go back and get the schooling that they had missed their years being in the Army. And these girls have a hard time finding somebody to talk to and tell their story to, because so many in their town have been affected by this and nobody wants to hear it anymore. And so the high moment came when the folks in Nairobi went to Uganda to have a retreat, and they invited these girls from Concerned Parents to come and join them. So we had these youth from these 2 different places coming together in this neutral ground near Kampala. And I've seen a picture now of them standing in a circle, holding hands, and playing games together and telling stories to each other. And the girls from Nairobi, when it was time for lunch, wanted to sit down next to a girl from Uganda and hear her story, and to pray with them, and to be with them and to remember them. And that was such a transforming time for those girls, that I saw for the first time that it wasn't just Africa-American connections that we were making, but it was Africa-Africa connections. That was just so exciting to see.
Yeah, that's amen is all I can say to that. I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions from the crowd. But let's go quickly. If I could ask Ryan, you, Joel, and Jim to give us the highlights.
You got it. So from a social entrepreneur perspective, probably the high of my life has been having the opportunity to go to Uganda this past July for a week and seeing the impact that the funds from the Humanity Campaign had made in the 4 nonprofits we had invested in. The low, I'm talking about entrepreneurship generally, back in 2002, we're living on futons, sleeping on futons, living in the office, cooking on George Foreman grills, and realizing I've got about $10,000 to my name, and it's going down by $1,500 a month.
Right.
And I've got about 7 months to make this work.
Yep. Joel.
The low for me would have been 2007, the year.
Yeah, if you could speak.
It was really tough. I mean, I had failed at events before, taken tests before, et cetera, but in solid, not a full 12, but 11 months of really difficult times. And, with successes intermittent, but looking at July 2007, we had a big project that invested $26,000 in Uganda. Got it off the ground. There was a fire at the facility in July, so that was starting to tank. It was really sad. And because we had spent so much time on that, our chapter growth was virtually zero. At the same time, it hired the wrong assistant director, and there were 2 of us full-time at the time, so that's the other person that you're working with. And you have different visions for the organization. The right business move is to stop at that point in time. But to answer your question, what keeps you going is you're absolutely married to an idea, and you say, this has to happen. So the high point was, we pulled together a strategy summit that December. Thank God for advisors. And pulled together, as many members of our board that we could, and our team went to D.C. for the weekend, got the assistant director out of there, and said, we're going to raise $50,000 in January, and the next 3 months we're going to figure out how to expand to 15 new campuses, and they're going to be qualified chapter founders. Crazy, but we actually did it. So I think the high point for me would have been in January when we successfully raised $50,000, got 3rd in national competition, one of the smallest groups in the competition, and then over the period of the next 3 months expanded to actually 19 new schools with 67 people applying.
Wow.
So that was pretty awesome. And yeah, the interesting thing is now we're at a milestone. So I'm actually, it's a really weird thing, but I'm actually stepping aside because there's somebody who can do the job better than me now. So that's a pretty neat place to be.
Wow, very impressive. We could have a whole session on succession in social entrepreneurship, and when the founder it's time for the founder to go and turn it over to someone else to take it to the next stage. And that's highly commendable is all I can say. There are many people that hold on too long. The other thing Joel talked about is his year of 2007 of failure. And it is really tough when you're used to being good and getting all this positive reinforcement to have an extended series of failures. That's something that requires extreme grit to get through. So, fabulous job. Jim?
I'm passionate about public education, and while a lot of the work I do is domestic, it has global implications. And I think the high for me is a year ago breaking ground for an $8.5 million, 42,000 square foot K-8 lab school for disadvantaged kids in Durham, North Carolina. And I guess the low was 7 years earlier, raising on Wall Street $1.5 million to kick off that project. And this is probably going to get me fired, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's what really happened. I got a grant from Wall Street for $1.5 million to launch this project about 8 years ago. And having one of the people I report to decide that that wasn't a priority for us and made me give it back. And $500,000 of it was already in the bank here, transferred to us. Now, that's not a failure. That's grounds for a drive-by. And, you know, if you really have to be an entrepreneur always sees the glass half full. I saw my way halfway to jail. But I think, you know, if you're not an entrepreneur, you fold your tent and you go home. But we didn't fold our tent and go home. We kept working on the project. and it will happen. We will get a certificate of occupancy, if all goes well, in May of 2009, and we will accept the first class in the school in July of 2009. So it's really about tenacity. The glass is always half full, even when it's half empty, and I'm still got my car running for the drive-by.
That's great. Okay, questions? Very back. If you could stand up and project loudly. Great. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll batch them, and then farm them out to the panel. So the question there is about how do you balance the ethical imperative of doing good with the need to do well, or the desire to do well financially? Okay. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, just fixed it.
All right. Great. That one's easy. Okay, who's right here?
Are there any paradigms for looking at projects, developing projects, and evaluating them? What is it that's being added that is different from volunteerism, charitable giving, businesses doing good? It sounds like a clever new name on old-fashioned
Right.
stuff.
Right. New labels on.
Is it just the internet?
Right.
Is it just a new youthful determination?
Right.
And if there's a sense of newness about it, what happens when it gets old?
Good question. So the question is it just new labels on the same old bottles? Okay, great. One more, and then we'll take it to the panel right here. Okay, great. I will come back to you, but let's take these 3 first. And so how about if we start with this paradigm question? Is this just a new label on an old bottle? Who has a...
Yes.
Yes, okay. Jim, you've been...
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's radically different. I think social entrepreneurship is about how do you create community wealth. It's neither corporate nor personal, but it's wealth to effect social change in the world. It's about forging strategic alliances that are mutually beneficial across the for-profit, nonprofit, and governmental sectors. They're far more likely to be enduring relationships. It's not about a corporation who's been caught with its pants down doing something socially responsible just to get to the next level and get the wolves off their rear end. It's about mutually beneficial alliances where there's a return on the investment for everybody involved in the relationship. They are far more enduring relationships than just doing something to keep the wolves off your rear end. So I think it's a real paradigm shift, and I think it's driven by a number of forces. First, discontent over globalization. At the domestic level, it's this thing about unfunded mandates, which is a double root canal without Novocaine. You get lots of instructions from the federal government what the nature of the problems are. One thing is missing. You don't have the resources to do it. So nonprofits and local entities are asked to do more with less. How do you do, if you care passionately like the people on this panel, how do you do more with less? You begin to think outside the box. You think about how you generate that revenue, and you graduate yourself from dependence on philanthropy and government dollars to have a sustainable operation, and that sustainability is about these mutually beneficial strategic alliances.
Yeah, I think, this is a really lively debate in the field about how to define this.
Can I add to my yes?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you did. Okay.
I need to qualify that.
Right.
I meant it when I said yes because I'm very much aware of the people who have come before me and generations before who have done really good work and fantastic things. And so there really is nothing new under the sun in that regard. But I would say that we are in a new era, and you commented on how the internet has made new things happen. I could not do Africa Rising without the internet. Not just the internet for a website to say here's what we're doing, but I use Skype to connect to communicate with Africa, and the organizations that we work with connect with each other through the internet. And so I would say the new thing that I'm seeing now is the model of the network. It has been said that the paradigm of let's say maybe pre-9/11 or before the 90s, the paradigm or the image was the Berlin Wall, where you had one side and you had the other, and these two superpowers faced off across the wall. And the paradigm of the current age is the internet, where there is no center, where there's multiple connections, where so many things can happen, and there's no circus leader in the middle of that internet. And a number of the organizations here, this man here has developed an internet company. So many of us are working through the internet that is allowing people to connect without us being the connecting point, and to be a catalyst of these connections. And I think that is something new that we haven't seen before.
Bill Drayton from Ashoka would answer you as follows. The definition of a social entrepreneur is someone who effects system changes, not just someone who provides services through volunteering or through philanthropy or whatever, but someone who fundamentally changes a system and sets it at a new equilibrium. You can imagine there's a continuum of things along all of these vectors that we're talking about here. I personally dislike the idea that social entrepreneurship is a real elitist thing, and I sort of embrace a much wider spectrum. But there are people that feel differently. So, Ryan, how about if you talk a little bit about the question of balancing financial and social?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think this is a very important question that a lot of young entrepreneurs and a lot of aspiring social entrepreneurs think about and struggle with. If you are doing business ethically in a socially responsible way, there's no way to make a lot of money without helping people. There's no way to make profit without providing social value to the person that is buying your product or service. Won't get into economic theory about trade and comparative advantage. You'll get enough of that in economics class. But in the real world, there's black and white, and then there's certainly grays. I think it's up to the individual entrepreneur to ensure that his or her business, for-profit business, is carried on in an ethical and sustainable manner. And if he or she does that, I think he or she should have no shame at all about making a lot of money. And then what you do with that money is up to you. And if you want to reinvest that in a nonprofit, in a foundation, in other social entrepreneurial initiatives, all the better.
Great. And then the question about the domestic versus international focus. It is true that a lot of times people are referring a lot to international social entrepreneurship, and yet we have great examples here of domestic social entrepreneurs. So anybody want to comment on the balance between those things? Joel, Kari, why didn't you guys focus on domestic things? We have enough problems here in the United States. Why are you going overseas?
That's an interesting. We actually it was a really tough choice for us to decide to work globally and not domestically, because you want to be ones, but at the end of the day, you do have to be something to somebody. So I think the question was, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it like what's the sort of the differences, or what are the perceived differences?
Yeah, but I mean, this is the, your main process of choosing and differences between working and after.
Got you. Part of it was a reaction to feeling like there were already a lot of established institutions here. So we definitely encourage people to get involved domestically. Was involved with a ton of service projects during college, doing work here. I think that's really important. So for me, I personally saw a more compelling need, and I think that's with any social venture what compels you. Just being honest with that. So that's why I personally chose, to go the route that we did with Nourish. With that in mind, it's actually a lot easier to start a domestic one, just because so much of the government grant money is going to be focused on North Carolina. So I actually think there's a ton of exciting domestic work going on. An awesome guy based right in North Carolina, blanking on the name, but self-help does billions of dollars a year in loans, all over Stanford Center for Social Innovation. Awesome guy. And if you just look at CASE's website, the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship over at Duke, they've got a whole host of examples, domestic examples right here in North Carolina. Really exciting stuff. Tons of stuff going on during right now.
I would like to, I'm going to first head back to your question up there, and can you hear me now? Great. Okay. I would like to point out that this is something that I have struggled with greatly until very recently. And what my dad tells me is that you have to see money as enabling. Whatever I want to do, I'm not going to be able to do it without money. And I think that all of us, some of the highs and lows were all associated with money. Money is enabling. Without money, you cannot do what you want to do. And whatever you end up doing with your money is your choice. But if you've chosen to go into social entrepreneurship and work on improving the environment, improving social context, improving social justice or environmental justice, then you can put whatever money you make back into that however you want to. So I don't see it as a mutually exclusive situation. Either you're gaining money or you're helping others earn money. You can be doing both at the same time in a very productive way, and then utilizing your money to go back into the cycle to do what you want with it. So I don't think that, I feel like a lot of times we, especially young idealistic people, are so trained to see money as this bad thing. But that's the only thing that makes what we want to do possible, and a vision, which a lot of us have. We just don't have money. So I don't see that as a limiting factor, and I don't see that as a deterrent. It's enabling. And then to comment on your question about international and domestic issues, I see it as a big issue of standards. In the U.S., we have, specifically with water, it's really easy for me to define this. In the U.S., we have a lot of water quality standards. We know what to expect. Sometimes it's a knowledge resource limitation issue, where if a community has poor water quality, they may not know all the grants available to them to improve it. Some individuals may not know the water quality tests available to them. But the standards are there, and given a little bit more knowledge, there's access to resources. My concern is, in a lot of other countries, there are not standards associated with water quality. There's not the standard, I would like to say germ theory, for instance, that we are taught here in the States since we're born. And so it's an issue of I know what standards lead to positive public health, and education. If I could just educate, that would be a great way to enable others to understand what's available to them. But I see social entrepreneurship as another way to go about that. So I choose to focus internationally because of that.
I just wanted to comment on the domestic versus international from a different lens. I think the lower amount of work done domestically has something to do with the way we have, over the past couple of decades, viewed poverty in America. And I think we draw a clear distinction in the debate between moral poverty and material poverty. The past 2 decades, we've been in policy orientation that lots of people in America are poor and it's their own fault. I read a classic paper by conservative policy analyst Charles Murray, said we waged a war on poverty in the 1960s and poverty won. And by that he meant that poverty won because we created a system of dependency. And if you think about the post-1990 era and the most sweeping welfare reform we had, it was called the Personal Responsibility and Work Reconciliation Act of 1996. We introduced a whole new paternalism, wed fare, bride fare, work fare. We had a fare for everything that we had to teach people how to behave, as opposed to looking at the structural constraints in society and the role that globalization played in growing inequality in our society. And so you're swimming up a real strong current in America when you start talking about alleviating poverty, because there's this the real strong and prevailing belief in the policy circles was that it's moral poverty, it's not material poverty that's the problem in America.
Very interesting. Let's take a couple more. We had, did you have a question over here? You, and then here, and then here. Yeah. Okay. It's a question about uninsured children in North Carolina. Yeah. Absolutely. Very good point. And I think there's someone, yeah, right here. One more question I'll collect and then go to the panel. Okay. Why don't we start with that? I think we probably all face that. You know, it's funny. My last loan at the World Bank before I left, $1 billion. The first project funded on global giving, $5,000. And on that day in 2002, I sat there and said, "What the hell? You know, what am I doing here?" And just speaking a little bit from my own experience, and it gets a bit to your question about the paradigm shift. From my perspective, it's a question about trying to do things that shift the system so that not only your $60 million, but other funds that flow into the system are better used. They go to the right problems and they're leveraged most efficiently to solve the problems. I also get I spent the first half of my career dealing with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Trade and the Minister of Education and dressed like this and official meetings and blah, blah, blah. That's really not very interesting from a human point of view. One of the greatest joys of my job now is to be able to operate at a much more human point of view. So that's my own probably not adequate response to that. Any other thoughts about the way you think about that?
William Easterly has written a book called White Man's Burden, and there he offers a critique of the USAID, World Bank, IMF system of dropping in large amounts of money and trying to change societies by doing that. And I want to be quick to say, as you said earlier, they do good work as well, so I don't want to paint them with one color, but he describes two approaches to working in the world. One is the planner approach, and one is the seeker or searcher approach. And the planners are these large institutions that I've just named, and the seekers are the ones who are looking for solutions that have arisen of their own organically at the grassroots, and then trying to fan those flames. He argues strongly and I think quite effectively for the seeker approach, which is what Africa Rising is doing, what many of us here are doing. And he talks about the development of our own society, of American society, and how that came about, organically through lots of mistakes and give and take, and systems growing out of, I'm overusing the word, but out of this organic relationships rather than imposed from above. And so that's where I'm putting my money. That's where I'm putting my time. I think it's going to take a long time, but I'm hopeful. I've seen a lot of improvement in other regions of the world along this line, and so I hold out that same hope, and I see so many answers in the African continent that I can invest in. So that's where I feel good about investing.
I'll add just one more thing to that my dad is 70 years old. He was born in 1938. And in 1938, there were arguably a lot more problems in the world than there are today. A lot less social justice, a lot more poverty, a lot more disease. And through innovation, entrepreneurship, engineering, and social entrepreneurs and science, we've been able to get halfway there just in 70 years. And I think that gives me hope that in the next 50 or 60 or 70 years, we can get the next halfway there.
Yeah, a lot of people, I was looking at some statistics a while back, and I was really surprised at how much of the economic activity and employment in the United States comes from small and medium-scale businesses like Ryan's. Businesses like his generate 80 to 85% of incremental employment every year in the United States, and over 50% of our economic output. And you always hear about the Googles and the big, giant companies or whatever. They're sexy, but they're not the primary drivers of growth. The primary drivers of growth are lots of little things happening out there in this kind of organic way that Jim's talking about. Maybe I'll take one more question. I'm going to defer the answer to yours, maybe with a one-on-one with Jim after, if that's okay. Let me take one more question, and then maybe we'll close. Or maybe two more. It's not coordinated. It's hard to know what everybody else is doing, et cetera. One more, well, we'll take two quick. Back there and then right here. We'll do it quickly. Okay, great question. Great question, yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Right. Yep. Yeah, I mean, Muhammad Yunus is, and again, it keeps coming back to your paradigm question. Muhammad Yunus he had two bold ideas. One, that you could lend money to poor people and they would pay it back. But even bolder is that you could lend it to women and they would pay it back. This, we laugh. At this time, when he started, that people thought he was crazy. And so Muhammad Yunus brought into reality what we take for granted today, which is what you say, that if you give people money, they can use it in their own benefit and pay it back. And furthermore, it turns out, of course, that women are much better at paying it back than men. And to make this system work, it's probably better to find the woman in the household and lend it to her than it is to the husband. Radically different idea than in the past. He was ridiculed when he started doing that, and he persevered and made it through. Any other comments on how you sustain things that you're doing?
Find one thing that you're really good at and stick to it. Honestly, one of the hardest things is to ignore all the other awesome opportunities that are out there. I mean, the times I've struggled the most is when I've tried to just do too much. But if you're doing one thing really well, whatever that is, even if it's providing that social value that we talked about, you're still going to have a customer. That's going to be a donor, but you're still going to have that. But if you try and do three different things, you're going to be in trouble.
And how about the question that the gentleman in the back raised of, there's all these things going on, and maybe there's Water Partners International and Water Plus and this and that, and there's no main water main, and nobody's doing anything from the government. And what's happening here? Is this just going to be chaos, or will there be something that emerges out of what appears to be chaos and self-organize into a system? What do you know? Kari, Jim?
Well, so now we've touched on something that I do as a professor. In my research on AIDS, one of the things I do is I go into a community and identify all the organizations that are working on one particular end product. In my case, it would be either prevention or treatment of AIDS. And then I interview them all about their interactions with everybody else in that community, and I map that out into a network and see who is working well with whom, and you can see visually, quantitatively, where the connections are and where they aren't, where they should be. And my research has found that when people work together, that the disease is better controlled. So it's something we all intuit, but now we have some quantitative evidence that shows that that's the case. And so carrying that over into my work with Africa Rising, that's one of the reasons that I believe so firmly in a network model, and not just connecting Americans to Africa, but Africans to Africans. And one of the things that we want to do in 2009 is to pull together a number of the organizations that we are working with so that they can begin teaching each other and working together.
Yeah, I would say, and our colleague here from USAID is aware of these silos that always happen. And when you're in these large organizations doing these things, you never have time to talk to. When I was at USAID, I never talked to the World Bank because I didn't have time. Then I was at the World Bank. I always meant to talk to USAID, but I really just didn't have time. If you think about a market economy, getting back to what Ryan does. There's no central command that is organizing this stuff. If Ryan starts a business, he goes out and he's looking around to see who his competitors are, what the opportunities are, and he's self-adjusting as he goes. In the aid business, since it's been dominated by large top-down sort of silos, has had neither the ability nor the incentive to do this. And therefore, it steps, everybody's stepping on everybody else's feet. Also, the power balance is out of whack, and the host communities should really be the ones choosing which projects that they will accept. And someone asked me if I regret leaving the World Bank, and usually the answer is no, but sometimes I think yes, because my next project there was going to be a marketplace where local communities got to choose from among World Bank projects. And we would send in our World Bank project people, and the community would sit there and say, I like that, don't like that, that's dumb, out, up, down. That would revolutionize the aid system if that happened. So maybe one day I'll go back to the mothership and do that. So, last question, or shall we? I think that's it. Thank you all very much. Thanks to the great panel here.
Hi, I'm Jessica Thomas with the Center for Sustainable Enterprise. I just wanted to say really quickly, thank you very much to Dennis and all of our panelists for coming tonight and sharing their experiences and their stories. I also wanted to thank everybody in the audience for joining us and really engaging our panelists in a really interesting discussion. And also wanted to thank UNCTV and also the Carolina Entrepreneurial Initiative for co-hosting this event with us. There were a lot of people involved in pulling this together. I hope you found this a very inspiring discussion, and I just want to mention for those who are inspired to act, to create sustained social and environmental change, we are launching a new program at the center called BASE. It's the Business Accelerator for Sustainable Entrepreneurship, and we are working to provide a broad set of business development resources for early stage social and sustainable entrepreneurs, and we're inviting those entrepreneurs to apply to the program right now. So we've got some more information about BASE outside. Please ask me if you have any interest in the program. And I also want to encourage everybody to stick around, continue the discussion with our panelists, and we also have a reception just outside, so continue to discuss some of these questions with each other. So thank you very much, and please